Hello, and welcome to the fourth of several online panel discussions with foster parents that we're calling the Arena. Foster Source is partnering with the Colorado Department of Human Services to bring you this series as an opportunity to connect, share real stories and struggles, and proactively seek support. I'm Renee Bernhard, your host for today. I am the founder and executive director of Foster Source, a nonprofit serving foster and kinship families statewide in Colorado, with services such as trauma-informed education, relief services like mattresses, car seats, and weighted items, and therapeutic services like sponsored therapy and equine services. My husband and I were foster parents in Adams County for 3 years. We fostered 10 children and adopted one. I'm thrilled to be your host today. I'm passionate about child welfare, dispelling myths within child welfare, and providing services for caretakers. Today's discussion is called Overcoming Barriers and will center around common challenges foster parents face, and we'll also discuss strategies for overcoming these challenges. Let's meet our foster parents. Today we have Natasha from Colorado Springs, and she fosters for Kids Crossing. We have Scott from Milliken, and he fosters for Weld County. We have Heather, who lives in Denver and fosters for Dungarvan, and Angela, a foster parent from Denver who fosters for Denver County. I'd love for you all to give us an introduction of yourself and tell us one of your biggest challenges about foster care. Angela, why don't you go first?
Thanks, Renee. I'm so excited to be here today, and there have definitely been a lot of challenges in our foster care journey. For me, the hardest one was that I am a planner and a list maker and an over-preparer, and nothing you can learn in training prepares you for what happens in the real world of foster care. So that was a big adjustment for me. Was just learning to roll with the punches and adjust on the fly. So that was a challenge, and I don't know that I've mastered it entirely, but it is a work in progress.
You can plan for the unexpected, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah.
Scott, how about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
We've only been fostering for a couple of years here in Weld County. We foster teenagers primarily. The youngest that we've ever fostered would be 11. So we specialize in the older kiddos and boys specifically. There's a lot of testosterone in the house, and my wife is the only woman in the house. And so that can be challenging for her, for sure. The rest of us are kind of just a bunch of nuts. So, but it can become emotionally exhausting, really, is what some days are just kind of a drain. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. Heather, you're our longtime foster parent on today's panel. Tell us a little bit about you and your fostering journey.
I'm Heather Gonzalez, and I am married to a wonderful, supportive husband, which helps. I have a biological daughter who's 28 and a grandson who's 4, and I am the president of the Colorado State Foster Parents Association. I think that one of the biggest challenges is that, as everybody can expect, is letting kids go back home or them leaving. That is very hard because you become attached to them. Thus, the reason that we have adopted 5 kids, a sibling group of 5 all at once. Absolutely love them, but I've had kids from my home straight from the hospital all the way up to 18, aging out of the system. So I've kind of seen a little of everything. One of the other challenges that I just want to mention is that you'll find out that every child is different. Just because you find something that works for one child, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for another child. These kids have trauma, and we have to learn how to work with that.
So important. Awesome. Thank you, Heather. Natasha, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me. So I've been a foster parent now for about 2 years. I am partnered. My partner and I became foster parents, became first-time parents when actually we became foster parents. So that was a big challenge for us, just learning how to co-parent together. And we've had older kids in the home, so 9 through 16 years old. And that can be a challenge when kids are coming that are older. And a lot of times they already have a set way of doing things. Both of our placements were pretty challenging in terms of big behaviors, so learning to navigate that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm excited to hear more from all of you. What a diversified panel of experience. This is awesome. Thank you all for being here. The first topic we're going to talk about today is therapy and healthcare. Angela, you had quite a realization early on in your first case. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're talking about overcoming barriers today. And when we got our first long-term placement, it was at the height of COVID, was when it was kind of new and everyone was learning how to navigate this new world. And our kiddo very badly needed physical and speech therapy. And we had a real struggle getting those going, which is, as a foster parent, you feel a lot of pressure to do everything you can to help these kids, get on the right track and start making good progress. And we really, it felt like a personal failure that I couldn't get this going and get it started. But I learned over time that the best thing I could do was rope in everyone involved in the case and get us all pulling in the same direction. And now that we're on our third long-term placement, and COVID, has changed a little bit too. But now that I've kind of learned how to work together with everyone involved in the case, we've had much different results getting therapies and services set up much quicker. And that's been a huge relief.
I think that's so important. I think a lot of newer foster parents sometimes hesitate to contact everyone on the team, but you're right. It really is the best way to get everyone working towards getting the child what he or she needs. Heather, you say you're a firm believer that every child should have a therapist. Why?
I do believe therapy is a big deal for kids. These kids, when they're first removed, they have attachment that has been broken, and they need that therapist to determine if they need more help. They've got something going on. And it may be nothing, and the therapist can say they don't need it at this time, but it might be something that the therapist can help them with. We don't want to make that determination as foster parents.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Natasha, with one of your first placements, the school the child attended was very far away. How did you deal with that?
Right. So we did ask our team if there was any support, such as Z-Trip or anything else that could help this kid get to school. And there wasn't. So I think it's really important as a foster parent, when you hear about a potential placement, to really ask all of the questions in terms of what are their appointments, where is their school. I think it's the best to keep a kid in their school whenever possible. Of course, there's always exceptions to that rule, but so much has changed for them in such a short amount of time. So keeping any consistency is usually really helpful for these kids. And I think it's really important to be realistic about what you can do. So we were able to make it work. But it became challenging at times, especially when I was having some health problems. For a time, my partner was the one having to do school pickup and drop off and driving an hour and a half every morning because the school was the opposite direction of his work. But a lot of times you can get a little creative. So even if the county can't provide a Z-Trip, signing a kid up for a mentor through the YAP program. Our second placement, we were able to have the kid's mentor pick him up from school sometimes, and transport him to different appointments, such as sibling visits or therapy. If your child has a CASA, that's another person who, it's just really great for a kid to be able to spend time with them on a weekly basis. So his CASA was able to pick him up from school once a week. So you can get creative even if your team specifically can't provide a direct transportation service. Another thing to keep in mind is, as a foster parent, right, you're certified to transport the child in your care, but your friends and family aren't necessarily. They have to fill out extra paperwork for that. So right when you become a foster parent, I would ask some family and friends to go ahead and fill that out. And if you're in a pinch, then they can help you. So luckily my parents live in the area and they've been able to help us out in a pinch and be able to legally do so.
Perfect. Great idea. Great idea. Scott, you discovered that having to drive teenagers all over the place had an unintended benefit. Tell us about the opportunity you found to chat with the teens while you were driving around.
In our home, sometimes with other eyes and ears present, they just kind of clam up and they don't like talking. But oftentimes when you get them one-on-one in a car, something changes and they just open up and they spill the beans, so to speak. They'll say things that they don't even realize they're saying and reveal things they don't realize that they're revealing. And it's enlightening in those moments. You get little glimpses of what these kids are up against in ways that you can help them. Whereas even in front of a therapist, for us anyway, our experience has been a lot of times of just shutting down when they're around strangers. So it's nice. It's been nice. Now there are exceptions to that rule. We have one kiddo that he puts his earbuds in, and it's just quiet time in the car, and that's okay too.
Yeah,
You have to make that normal for them.
absolutely. Heather, you had some luck when you engaged your GAL regarding transportation. What happened there?
Oh, yes. I think it's very important to work with your team. Natasha was saying how she works with all the teams, the causes, and that is so, so important because they can assist you. I started fostering in a time before there was a rule that the kids had to go to the same school. So it was really challenging to have these kids move schools every time they moved into my house. And it brought up extra issues for them. But once that rule went into place that they have to attempt to get them to go back to the school that they're currently at, it's been wonderful. Now, there were some delays. And the very first one I had when the rule was put in place, the school districts, my current district where I live, and then the district where the child goes, they have to work it out between themselves, who's going to drive, who's going to pay, etc. Well, they just kept putting it off. And I made a phone call to the GAL and I said, he still doesn't have a ride to school. Well, the kids have a right to an education. She made a phone call, and next morning I had a bus at my door for that child. So use your team. They're very helpful.
Yes, great suggestions. And Scott, you've had some luck through your foster care coordinator to get mileage reimbursement?
Yeah, we did. At a certain point, I had two different kids going to specialty high schools, and neither one of them were close to us. And it was a strain on me to try to get them on time every day and just to get them there, period. And it was quite a time investment every morning. And so I expressed my concern to our FCC. I'm like, I'm just driving nonstop. And so she asked her supervisors, and they were able to get me mileage for it, which it helped immensely. I mean, there's a lot of miles that go into our vehicles and a lot of time in the car. And so that helped at least ease the burden, so to speak, as far as that goes. And that taught me that it's okay to ask. And it's good for us, and it's good for the kids. It was nice to know that we had such a support team. Now I am giving rides to 3 of his classmates as well. They live here in town, and they didn't have a way to get back and forth to school. So that kind of was nice to be able to include them as well. And our kids, sometimes they have a hard time making relationships, making friends. And so now I've got them in a car every day with 3 friends, and it's nice.
That's wonderful. And it's also giving them typical teenage experiences. And that's
Absolutely.
Exactly what they need. Well done. Well done, Scott.
Renee, I'd love to add, for anyone who is a prospective foster parent, one of the things we didn't know to ask about transportation when we were looking at agency versus county, this might be one of the things that's a good question to ask when you are in discovery mode and trying to figure out what's a good fit for your family if you want to go direct through a county or through an agency. Asking about things like transportation or those kinds of supports might help you narrow down what's going to be a best fit for your family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said, Angela. Well, like Natasha mentioned earlier, your life doesn't stop when you start foster parenting. You find ways to incorporate the children into your care, into your everyday activities, and also into special moments like vacations. Heather, you've taken children in care with you on vacation before. Tell us about that.
I have. I love taking them on vacation when I get the opportunity to. A lot of these kids haven't had firsts. So we went to Oregon with one particular child and rented a house on the beach. And he'd never seen the ocean. So his enthusiasm and excitement, we got to relive that with him, and seeing him, so excited. It was wonderful. Now, it doesn't mean we didn't have challenges on the way, because he still had some things, and being around new people is challenging, but he got to roast marshmallows, which he'd never done before. And we didn't know that until he told us. But the whole vacation, everything was things he had never seen, never done. If you're going to, though, you do need to try and give your county at least 30 days, county or agency, at least 30 days notice so that they can transfer. Well, if the parents are involved, they can get approval from the parents. They also need to put it in with the courts. They also need to make sure that the insurance is covered because the Medicaid in Colorado does not transfer to other states. So they have to do a little bit on the back end. So you need to try and give them at least 30 days.
Great advice. Great advice. Natasha, sometimes we don't take our children in care with us on vacation for a variety of reasons. Share with us, if you would, your perspective on that.
Sure. So, yeah, I think there's definitely pros and cons to doing it, and it really depends on the child in your care. So we have taken a kid in care on vacation with us one time to a family reunion. And that was a really interesting experience because stuff came up that I had not anticipated. So if you do take a kid on vacation with you and there'll be other people around that you know, I think educating them on a few things is really important. One of those things is around touch. So a lot of kids in care do not want to be hugged by people they don't know. So we educated the family around, definitely ask before you hug, or if you know a child doesn't prefer hugs, just to be like, you know what, you can offer high fives or fist bumps, but definitely making sure a child knows when a touch is coming and giving them the option to engage in that or not can make a massive difference. And that's something that family might just be really excited to meet a kid and not really realize what they're doing. Another thing is, we talked about the burnout rate at the beginning. It is totally okay to take time for yourself, or sometimes, when it doesn't make sense for a kid to come on a vacation, is make sure they go to a respite home that they enjoy and that they've been to before, because then it's sort of a vacation for them as well. And it's something they can look forward to. We've had kids really enjoy going to respite care, and especially if you find a family that gels really well with the kid, keeping up with them and making sure that they're available when you're planning on going out of town can be really helpful. So it can be a win-win for everybody. And then that gives the time for the kid to miss you. And sometimes the kid needs a break too, and they'll even tell you that. And that's something not to take personally, and realize that this is a hard thing. It's a hard thing to live with strangers. So taking those breaks
Absolutely.
can make sure that you're showing up as your best self.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And we're going to dive into respite care here in just a second. I just want to mention one other thing that I think is really important regarding vacations and travel. Well, two things, actually. The first is that it is the bio parent's right to decide whether or not that child travels with you. That is absolutely their right, and their right that we need to respect. The other issue is that the judge may decide this isn't a good idea for the child. And sometimes there are things in the case that we don't know about, and it's just better to listen to the judge and respect his or her wishes regarding travel and vacation. Natasha, thank you for bringing up respite care. That is the next barrier that I'd like to dive into a little bit. Respite care, for those who don't know, is when the foster family takes a little bit of a break and the child spends time in another foster home for a few days. It is necessary, and it is very, rejuvenating in a way. Everyone needs a break sometimes. Natasha just explained it perfectly, adding that the children need a break sometimes. Respite care is probably one of the most requested things we get at Foster Source. And Scott, I hear you've hit the jackpot in this department in that you have friends who became certified so that they can provide respite for you.
Absolutely. A lot of people reach out and say, what can we be doing to support you? And honestly, most days you don't even know what you can be doing yourself to help yourself. So it's kind of hard to describe somebody else what they can be doing. We do mostly staycations. We do a lot of camping. Next weekend, we're taking the kids, renting a vacation home, and going snow tubing. They really enjoy that. But last fall, for our second honeymoon, my wife and I, it took months of planning, of course, as respite should, by the way. But one of our friends said, what can I do? And I said, well, how serious are you about that question? Because if you really want to know, then you can take lots of training and become respite certified. And she did. I mean, it was, of course, she was happy to do it. And she is now very close to our kids. She's a confidant for a lot of them. And it's been a neat relationship builder for them. It's kind of like having an aunt now that they get to talk to and reach out to. And So we really did hit the jackpot. We have a lot of good friends like that.
What a gift. What a gift.
Yeah.
Heather, you say caregiver fatigue is real. Talk to us a
Yes,
little
it
bit
is.
about what has worked for you over the years.
Caregiver fatigue, we try and do it all, and we think that we might look a little weak if we say, I need a break. At least I did, and that's what I hear from some foster parents. Or you think your child is too challenging to go to respite, and it's very, very detrimental to you. You start empathizing with the children, which is very important. You got to empathize with them, but you can take on the challenges that they're feeling. You can take on the trauma they're feeling. When you have these kids in your home, it's wonderful, but you're living that trauma, so you've got to take a break. Even if it's something as simple as you get up 2 hours early, sit on your porch and have a cup of coffee, or leave the house and join a choir one night a week. Just simple things to give yourself a break is really, really important.
Great advice. And I want to echo your advice to get to know your fellow foster parents. They understand you like no one else understands you, and they will support you like no one else can likely support you. We all know as foster parents that our job, besides caring for the children, is to support the birth families as they work towards reunification with their child. And that means really getting to know the biological parent. Angela, you have an interesting story about the birth parent that you worked with. It didn't initially start off with the greatest relationship, and then she asked you an interesting question at one point. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. I think, the system unintentionally, when you get that first placement, or, when a placement first comes into your home, it can sometimes feel like you and the bio parent are set up to be enemies, that it's, you against them, that they've made some terrible mistake and you are, taking care of this kid that they couldn't. But my advice is to fight that, work through that, and to get to know the person behind the decision. When our first long-term placement came to us, something that I really wasn't prepared for in training was that when we were first able to speak on the phone, one of the first questions she asked me was what my race was. And I was not prepared to answer that. I did not have a graceful answer. I kind of laughed and said, I'm very white. And, for a while I really struggled with, like, why would she care about that? What does it matter what race I am? I'm taking care of this child and keeping him safe. Why do you care? What race I am? But I've learned over time that is the whole issue right there, is that it's not about what I think is important, or whether or not that question would matter to me. It's about the bio parent's feelings. Their child has been taken out of their care, and whatever is, important to them and on their mind, you have to be willing to meet them where they're at, and be open to their perspective and, what matters to them. So it took a long journey for us to get to a good place, but amazingly, 2 years later, bio mom and kiddo have been reunited. He's home with mom now. And we are an ongoing support to their family. We have a great relationship. They are like extended family. We've celebrated holidays together. He comes over to our house almost every other weekend. He still has a room at our house that's set up, the same way it was when he lived here. And it's just so nice. Mom has no obligation to let us know what's going on in their lives whatsoever. She could have told us, thanks, see ya. And this piece of my heart would be out there walking around with me never knowing how he's doing. But by investing the time and effort in setting aside my perspectives to try to understand what was important to her and why about her culture, I think that was a big step towards us building a long-term relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Natasha, this is a passion of yours. It's so important for white foster parents to understand the role that their privilege can play in taking care of a child. Not a good role, by the way. Why is this so important? And tell us a little bit about what you're doing to help combat that.
Yeah, thank you. This is such a great question. And like you said, something I'm really, really passionate about. So I'm a woman of color myself. My mom is an immigrant from Iran, and I grew up in a really bicultural household. My dad's American. And so that really gave me, I think, a different perspective than many on foster care. I really see it as culture clashes, right? A kid comes to you, especially in my experience with older children, they come to you with their own set of beliefs and ways of doing things and ways of living. And, you have your own set of beliefs and ways of doing things. And a lot of times it's really easy to make a lot of assumptions. So especially with teenagers, right? They might talk to you in a way that you're like, obviously that's really disrespectful. Maybe that's how they were talked to their whole lives, and they think that's a valid way of speaking to people. So it just gives you, I think, a different perspective in terms of like asking more questions instead of assuming, saying, hey, this is how I define respect in my home. How do you define it? Let's find some middle ground. And you can open up a lot more conversations, I think, than you would otherwise if you're not going through this perspective of foster parenting really is a huge culture clash every step of the way. Another thing is the white savior complex is really embedded in the foster care system. I've seen it rear its really ugly head. Even as a woman of color, I have to catch myself sometimes and think through, what implicit biases am I having? I think too, I've had kids who are different ethnicities than me in the home. And I think it's so important to recognize that and to help them connect to their culture in ways that make sense for them or in ways that they would like to. Because that's a huge loss to have to live in a different culture than the one that you were raised in. And I think it's so easy to overlook that. Another thing to keep in mind too is, as a foster parent, you can never, ever make up for a child's biological family and them not being able to be with them. So that can be a really hard pill to swallow, but I think that's so integral to being a healthy foster parent is to be able to sit in that tension too of like things are not ideal. And oftentimes you're choosing between two non-ideals, right? And just realizing that your way of life isn't necessarily the right or best way of life, especially for a child in your care. And how can you adjust what you're doing to not just fit a kid into your life and shove them in there, but how can you allow a kid to change you and help you grow? I think as a foster parent, that's one of the things I try to ask myself a lot is how am I growing? How am I changing? And that's just a lot better barometer for success too than expecting a child to change.
Absolutely. This is so important. Thank you for your work in this area, Natasha. It's valued and important. Scott, you've had some interesting relationships with bio parents as well, and you talk about the need for setting healthy boundaries with parents. Tell us a little bit more about that.
They desire to be with their bio mom desperately, and vice versa. And it's been 2 years now that they've been in our care, but we've allowed her to become a part of our life in so many different ways. She's spent multiple holidays at our home. We let her come take her kids trick-or-treating. She comes to church with us. But the boundaries are important because that's when it gets uncomfortable. We want them to have her in their life, and we want her to have them in her life. We want that. It's healthy. That's what they desire. It's important to put those boundaries in to protect them and to protect us.
And I think it's important to remember that children are processing and reprocessing their trauma for years, for possibly a lifetime. So it's kind of like we talk about a living document. It's a living process to kind of reassess every now and again what our boundaries are looking like and see if we need to loosen up a little or tighten up a little. Thank you, Scott. Heather, you have had a lot of children reunify and go home. And for a foster parent, when people ask me about it, I tell them it can feel like a death when they reunify. And you say, if the bio parents don't want an ongoing relationship, you have to accept that and deal with it. Tell us a little bit more about your experience.
Well, what I try and do, as we've been talking about the family relationships, I try from day one to let them know, I'm not here to take your kids. I'm here to help you get them back. What I do tell people, though, when you have reunification, it's not just you and your significant other that feel it. If you have kids in your house, they feel it too. So you really need to take time away for your family. Grief time, as you said, it's kind of like a death. So you need to take some grief time and do things as a family, process that they're not there before you step in and take another one. That is really important as part of taking care of yourself. But I like what Angela was saying about you just keep trying with these parents. It's really important.
Wonderful. Yes, Angela, you say if you're really grieving after a child reunifies, you know you've done your job correctly. Elaborate on that a little bit more.
These children need and deserve to be given a place in your family that is just the same as if they had always been there and if they will always be there in the future. At one point, speaking about Scott's experience, Renee, you mentioned that you're giving these kids a typical teenage experience, and that is, every kid deserves that at every age, to be loved as if they are no different than another part of your family. And so, of course, it's going to hurt if you're doing that. Of course, it's going to tear out a piece of your heart, but that's why it's worth investing in building relationships. And I would really encourage any prospective foster parents to think about stepping into this care role, not as caring for a child, but helping build communities. It's not just about one child. It's about the family, and it's about those extended support systems, whether it's aunts and uncles or, respite care providers that they connect well with, or your own extended family that becomes their extended family. A lot of times that you'll learn that, yes, bio parents made a decision that landed their kid in care, but if you really step back, sometimes the choices that they made a bad decision out of two really stinky choices. And when you can peel back those layers and understand what is at the root of some of those decisions, you understand that a lack of resources and a lack of support is so many times at the root of what leads to a child in care. So to overcome that, you got to love real hard. And if you do love real hard, it hurts when that relationship comes to an end.
We often hear people say, I could never do it. I could never give them back. And when I speak with prospective foster parents, I tell them that's actually the gift that you give the child, is that you invite their trauma and their rage into your home, and you give them your willingness to process that with them in exchange for planting a seed in them that you will likely never see grow. That is the gift that we give the child. Thank you all so much for participating in the panel. To close, I would like each of you to share with me one thing you would tell a prospective foster parent. Heather?
No, I can go way more than one, but we'll stick with take as many trauma courses as you can. It's really important to understand where these kids are coming from and behaviors that you might see. You might not ever face any, which is wonderful. But be prepared.
Scott, what would you tell a prospective foster parent?
If you're thinking about doing this to feel appreciated, you're going to be disappointed. It's just going to hurt even worse because oftentimes they don't, at least in my experience, a lot of times they don't want to make you feel important because everyone important in their life has left them or abandoned them or neglected them or abused them. And so if they let you know that you're important, they're just setting themselves up for hurt. So appreciation is few and far between.
Well said. Well said. Angela, how about you?
I tell people, I love talking about foster care, and I tell people all the time that it is the worst, saddest, hardest, most awful thing I've ever done, and I highly recommend it. It is hard. We don't go into it because it's easy, but I would truly encourage anyone new to foster care to think of it like learning a new language. Behavior is communication. Sometimes these kids and these families, the only way they know how to communicate is through their behavior. So when you can kind of take a step back and learn to look at it as, okay, they're telling me something. I just need to figure out what it is they're trying to tell me with this behavior.
So another vote for lots of trauma training, it sounds like, too. Natasha, what would you share?
I would say find your community and try to do this as much as possible before you start foster parenting. When I was in foster parent training, they had us do this really great exercise where they actually had us fill out names and like who is going to be someone that you can go to, when you're struggling or that can help you out with a kid. And as a result of that exercise, my partner and I actually ended up moving cities. So we moved from Denver to Colorado Springs to be closer to our families. And that was a huge decision that we made. And I think it's paid off so well. And not everyone has that benefit of being able to live close to family, but whether it's friends or if you don't have anyone in your circle, start making connections. There's a lot of foster parenting Facebook groups, or your agency or county can point you in a direction to get connected. Also learn about the resources in your own community as well. I think that's so important. You have to realize you cannot do everything for these kids, nor should you try to. And especially with older kids, kind of like Scott saying, they're not going to let you know certain things or let you feel important, but they will like bond maybe a little harder, easier to someone else outside the home just because of all the trauma. And so connect them right to sports or after school programs or mentorships or any of that. That's just so important to give these kids an opportunity to build their own community as well. Every kid needs a community to thrive.
Perfect. Thank you so much to all of you. If you are interested in becoming a foster parent, first of all, thank you. Thank you for your interest. Your first step is to attend an informational meeting at either your local county or a local child placement agency. You can find upcoming meetings at co4kids.org. Don't think you're quite ready to foster? There's still plenty you can do to help. You can become an advocate through the court-appointed special advocates, or CASAs. You can be a neighbor to a family needing help through Families Together, or you can reach out to a local nonprofit like Foster Source, the Colorado State Foster Parent Association, or just a special. There's tons for you to do, and we welcome your engagement. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time.